All right, Socrates likes questions, so let's start with a question. How many of you would think of yourselves as good people? About 3/4. All right. Not usually the Catholic response. You're apparently well-educated Catholics. And for the rest of them, how many of you would like to think of yourselves as good people? That if you were good, you would think that would be preferable to the alternative? The rest of you. Right? Yeah. We all seem to think that being good is better than being bad. Right? That goodness isn't good for nothing. It's good for something. But the question is, how good is goodness? And that might sound weird. You're like, what do you mean, how good is goodness? It has to be good. True, but how good? Glaucon and Adeimantus come up to Socrates right at the beginning of Book 2, and that's their concern. But they're using a different word. They're using the word justice, which might throw us off if we're not very careful in what our terms. And their question is, how good is justice? You say, well, what do you mean by justice? Well, usually when we hear the word justice these days, we think about something social or corporate. Criminal justice, social justice, right? Justice between groups of people or between individuals on this scale. But there's this other conception of justice that, 400 or 500 years ago, you would hear this kind of locution. In the King James Version of the Bible, Job is called a just man. Their justice is not a property of a relation between groups. Their justice is a property of an individual person. Justice is being a morally high-quality person. Okay, and that's the kind of justice that's driving this question. What's driving Socrates, Glaucon and Adeimantus, to ask Socrates the question. In fact, Socrates, the use of the word justice in Greek is dike, and St. Paul use for the word righteousness that you'll find all the time in the, hey, hi everyone, hey Andrew, uses the word dikasune for the word righteousness, right? And when you read St. Paul's letters in the book of Romans and you get righteousness, you know what he's talking about, that good, high moral quality within a person, okay? And the root goes all the way back to Plato with the concept of justice. So the question is, how good a thing is individual justice, the justice of soul? What we would now tend to call moral goodness. And every time you see justice, at the beginning at least, that's what they're talking about. We will elevate it to a larger question, because presumably justices have something to do with one another. Okay? But at the beginning, this is the question. For those of you who just got here, Glaucon and Adeimantus have a question for Socrates, and I'm taking roll so I can keep track of everybody, because I don't know all the names. So what are your two's names?
I'm Allie.
Okay, Allie. Which Allie are you? All right. And?
Liz Manning.
Liz. I'm still wondering who Alexander's going to turn out to be. Alexandra. We'll see. Okay. But back to our argument. So, how good is justice? You might say, well, can you give me a multiple choice of options? Right? Seems reasonable. And essentially, that's what they give Socrates. So the first type of goodness, let's think about 3 ways we can think of goodness. One is some things are only good for what they bring us. Okay? So imagine doing something which you would not want to do in itself, but you do because it gets you something that you really do want. Like latrine digging. How many of you love to dig latrines? Hands going up all over the room. Didn't expect it, right? You're like, no, I want to dig latrines. This is a ridiculous thing. But if you are in the army, right, and your sergeant says, go dig some latrines, well, that changes the equation, doesn't it? Now, digging latrines is good for something else, right? Because you can get promoted, perhaps, or you can avoid getting sent to the stockade. So, latrine digging is not good in itself. Latrine digging is good for other things, only for other things. Everyone understand? So the first question is, moral goodness, is it like that? Or option 2, some things are only good for themselves, not for what they bring. You say, what would be an example of that? Let's put latrine digging over here so we remember. How about happiness? When you think about happiness, you don't think of it as something you're pursuing in order to do other things, right? You don't say, I really wish I was happy because then maybe I'd go to the movies. You're like, no, that's not how we talk. I want to go to the movies because it will be enjoyable, then I might get happy, right? Or if I'm happy, then I'll go get an ice cream cone. No, the ice cream cone is supposed to give you delight, so maybe that will lead to your happiness. Happiness isn't the means to the end, right? Happiness is the end, the thing you're after, the ultimate thing you're after. So happiness, we might say, is something that's only good in itself. It's not good for the sake of other things. It's the thing we're ultimately after. So is justice like that? Option 3. Some things are good for both. They're good for other things and good for themselves. You might say, well, Jeff, give me an example of that. All right. How about seeing? Right? Is seeing useful for the sake of other things? Yes, because you can see, you don't fall into the well. It's in your path. That's very useful. Right? Seeing helps you drive. Seeing helps you read the board. So seeing is good for all kinds of other things. But don't you just enjoy seeing for its own sake? Right? Looking at the sky, the beautiful day today, all these birds, the grass, an artwork, just seeing. There's something delightful about being able to see. So seeing is also good in itself. Thus, seeing, we might argue, is good both for itself and for the sake of other things. It's both a means and an end, right? Everyone understand the structure? Now, the last option would be that it's good for nothing. But of course, we started off with the idea that justice is good for something because everyone agreed you either are good or you would hope to be good. No one said, I really crave evil. Right? That'd be weird. That'd be weird. So, it's good for something. And so Glaucon and Adeimantus come up to Socrates and they say, into which of these 3 categories, Socrates, would you put justice? So, what does Socrates say? Which one does he go for? The third option, that justice is one of the things that's good both for itself and for the sake of other things. And this really shouldn't be a surprise to us when you think about how, as parents, we try to teach our children to be good. We used both strategies. So, for example, Thomas, do you want to go to prison?
Not special.
You better stop your stealing ways. Right? Mike, do you want to have friends?
Sure.
You better be a loyal person. Right? Moral justice is good to avoid harms, prison, gain friends, a benefit. Don't we make prudential arguments like this to encourage our children? Choose the just path, right? But then sometimes we'll say it like this, but Mom, I can get away with cheating on the exam. I've got it all figured out. At that point, sometimes Mom just says, but it's wrong. Oh, right, yeah, that's right. Right? It's wrong in itself. Doesn't matter whether you think you could get away with it. So then we're making the idea that justice is good in and of itself. Even if you don't pass the exam, maybe you'll get a C instead of an A. But it's still better to do the right thing than do the wrong thing and get away with it, right? And don't we make arguments like this to our children too? Yeah, our entire moral education of our children comes down to these 2 moral thrusts. And we mix them up, obviously we use both, in all kinds of sophisticated ways. But it really does come down to those moves. So this does fit with the way we tend to think about it. And Socrates, it's always great when you start and Socrates agrees with you. We got Socrates on our side. He said, good, so we should be done, right? There's so much more of the book. That's true, because Glaucon and Adeimantus aren't sure they buy this. They're worried maybe they smell a rat. You say, what kind of a rat? Well, do you still act just when no one's looking? You're like, yeah, if justice were good in itself, it wouldn't matter if I was being watched. I would still be just. See, they think maybe the only reason we're just is because we're afraid of getting caught. But if you could get away with it, why would you be just? Right? Think about the people that maybe did get away with it. I'm thinking of Alexander the Great. So great, that was his last name. You gotta be pretty great, right? Now, how was he so great? What did he do?
He destroyed his teachers, all his teachings, went against them, destroyed them.
Oh, okay, well maybe he did disagree with Aristotle on a few points. But he conquered the Persian Empire, right? This was a mass slaughter. Not saying the Persians didn't have it coming. Maybe they did. But still, it was a mass slaughter, right? At Acre, for example, you know what he did at Acre? He was so pissed off that they made him wait, and they had to build this big causeway to get out because it was out in the water. And he kept telling them to surrender. They said, no, we're not going to surrender. So they built a causeway, you know, like it's a ramp with rocks. And they kept coming and shooting his guys with arrows. So when he finally broke into the city, he crucified the top 5,000 noblemen of the city. He's like, Alexander the Great? Oh, of course, Alexander.
You left that out of the biopic.
Yes. Wikipedia, that's not the top feature of Alexander. All right? So that's interesting. That's interesting. Julius Caesar, another great, right? But if you read his book, The Gallic Wars, where he conquered Gaul, what we call France today, he admits he killed 1 million Gauls. Now, if you decide to, take a hammer, a sledgehammer, and you go into Kroger and you start whacking people with the thing, and you get up to 10 before they tackle you, we don't say, we should change that guy's name to the Great. We don't do that. And if you kill millions like Hitler did, right? He killed millions. And he lost. Not so great. Stalin actually killed way more than Hitler did, if you do the math. And for some reason, we allied with Stalin against Hitler. Right? Remember, they both hit Poland. The Russians just waited 2 weeks to see what would happen, and then they hit it from the other side. So that's curious. And Stalin was worse. We could definitely make an argument of that kind. But somehow, he seems to have controlled the narrative better, right? Yeah, Mao is still revered, and there was a mass slaughter of his own people. So what if you were so powerful that you could write your own history books and control the picture? What if you could really get away with it? Then why pursue justice? We have people to this day that when they think they can get away with a dictatorship, they go for it, right? Saddam Hussein played this card, right? Obviously, Putin is playing this card. Kim and the whole Kim family in North Korea, one after another. So, are they onto something? Is the truth of the matter that we're just, frankly, scared little weaklings? Right? So we start talking about natural rights, and let's build defensive republics and ally with other countries and stop the big bad man. But the truth is, we're pathetically weak. So we start talking about justice, right? But if you could be that powerful, what would you do? What would you do? Is justice really good in itself? Glaucon and Adeimantus agree that this is true. Nobody's going to dispute this. This is the question. Should we really pursue justice, or should we pursue power? And that's what this book is about. Justice versus power. Which one is actually greater? To make their case a little more practical, Glaucon remembers a story, an ancient story about a guy named Gyges. And Gyges found a ring in the cleft of a rock, and it had a little gemstone on it that when you turned it, it turned you invisible. Now, we're familiar with invisibility rings because the Tolkien stories, those of you who read them before they were made films, and then of course they were made films, so now everybody by now knows about the Tolkien rings. And I know that some of you have strong feelings about this, but pardon my saying this, but Tolkien's ring sucks. Right? You're like, what? Okay. When Frodo puts the thing on and he walks out of the water, what does he leave behind him? No, who said clothes? No, he still gets his clothes on. Somehow the rings always manage to cover your clothes, not just your body, which is interesting. Okay? He leaves footprints behind him. Oh yeah, that's great, right? The orcs would know exactly where he is. Or how about this? Who always sees him every time he puts the ring on? Sauron, the great eye. Oh, that's terrific, right? Gyge's ring is so powerful, it blocks the view not just of men, but of gods. You're like, okay, well, that's a lot better. If you can block gods, you can certainly block Sauron, right? Gyge's ring is so good that bloodhounds cannot smell you out. It blocks bloodhounds. You don't leave footprints behind you. It eliminates audio. You could pass through infrared detectors, nothing. Gyge's ring is so good, the Romulans of Star Trek are trying to get a hold of it because they think their cloaking device is not as good. That's pretty good, right? One further point about Tolkien. I can see you Tolkien fans like, how do you turn off the Tolkien ring?
Take it off.
See the problem? And what did the ring do to Isildur? Remember? It's gone. This is not a good system. How about you keep it on at all times and you just flip a switch? I consider this a better system. That was Gyge's ring. You catching on here? Better than Tolkien. All right? You say, you're making a lot of enemies, Dr. Steele. I know. I love Tolkien too, but this particular point, not as good. Now, once he had the ring, he began to wonder what some of us wonder. What do my friends talk about when I'm not there? Now, of course, we all know, right? We all know, because what do we talk about when they're not there? You're like, oh, them. Therefore, it tends to reason, right? Stands to reason. But you say, I know that. I want to know the details. Okay, fine. So one day, he goes out with the boys, they're having some drinks in the bar, right? And then he makes a big to-do. The wife wants me to be home early. Gotta go. All right, see you later, guys. And he goes out of the bar, make sure no one's looking. Invisible. And then he goes back into the bar. And oh, does he hear things that night. Now, his friends, the next day, report a whole series of unfortunate events. One of them, all the way home, kept tripping over what he thought was sticks in the road. And yet, every time he looked, there was no stick. Another one, who had particularly nasty things to say about Gyges that night at the bar, could have sworn he kept running directly into a fist all the way home. And he looked in the mirror, and yep, it was fist-like. All right? Now, Gyges laughed about it. Yeah, you can get a chair somewhere. Gyges laughed about this for a few days until he wisened up and realized he could do a lot more with this ring. Right? So to make a very long story short, he killed the king, seduced the queen, and took over the kingdom, and he lived happily ever after. Now, I am in negotiations with Disney to make this their next story because this is great stuff, right? At least the old version of Disney, right? You're like, no, this is not going to work. You can't say at the end, and they lived happily ever after. Why not?
Because justice didn't prevail.
Right, but why do we need justice? If you are so powerful, you can turn invisible. I mean, ask yourselves, what would you do if you had a ring like that? Let's update the scenario and make it contemporary. You do have a ring, and you live in Columbus, right? And one day you're walking down the street invisible, keeping in mind that you can't go across the streets because they can't see you. So many of my invisible friends have been killed by trucks. It's a real problem. So take care, all right? So you go along and you see, there's the big bank, Huntington Bank. The big one with the H. And they got all the stuff in the basement. I found out they've got all those safe deposit boxes down there. And you think to yourself, what is in that vault? I mean, you've seen it on TV, right? But is that really what's in the vault? This is only being inquired for scientific purposes. That's it. We need the facts, nothing but the facts. And you think to yourself, that would be very interesting to find out. And so for scientific reasons, you decide to go into the vault, right? You're invisible after all. What's the problem? So you jump over, past the no unauthorized entry sign, figuring an invisibility ring gives you authorization. And there you go. And of course, it's a vault. But to your shock, to your surprise, there was an enormous stack of $100 bills. And then you remember, yeah, I just saw the Wells Fargo truck leaving, right? No wonder there's all this money in this bank. And you're like, this is extraordinary. Wow, all this money just sitting here, wasting away, right? Think of what could be done with this money if somebody put it to good use. Soup kitchens, helping people who are struggling with mental diseases, right? How about there's so many things that could be done. Your mind just starts running through them. You could send money to help Mother Teresa's outfit. It's shocking what could be done. But alas, the money's just sitting here. It's a real shame. Green is really quite beautiful, actually. I mean, if a few stacks went missing, okay, so they would know, but they wouldn't know it was you. You are invisible, right? Now, you're going to make objections at this point. Come on. How does the invisibility ring extend to the money? I don't know. But in these stories, this is how it works. So give me a break, right? Yeah.
Cloak.
Yes, there's a cloak. There's a cloak. But should I take it? And then, of course, your mind says to yourself, well, there's the problem of theft, right? And I don't have to worry about this issue because I'm going to get away with this, right? The issue is it's wrong in itself. Stealing is wrong. My mom taught me this. So therefore, I should not steal. But I do remember somebody who took some money from the rich and gave it to the poor. And think about the banker who has this enormous $100 million right here. Let's see, what was that guy's name? He was a Hood, right? Robin Hood. Yeah, we like that Hood, right? Robin the Hood. Steals from the rich, give to the poor. This is great. I mean, it's $100 million, I realize that, and that seems like a lot, but what if you kept only 15% for expenses, and the other 85% you did give to charities and the poor and everything? Okay, some people are making little sniffling remarks. 10%. 10% for expenses, 90%. That's pretty good, right? That seems reasonable. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. Steal from the rich, give to the poor. And so, you decide you're going to take the money. And as you're on your way out, stuffing the money into your bag, which, yes, also turns invisible. Okay? And how you're able to carry this, you got me, but you are. All right? You remember something. Robin Hood stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Right? But are we really stealing from the rich and giving to the poor?
Yeah.
You don't know who this $100 million really belongs to.
Yeah. The bank doesn't own the $100 million. What if depositors, what if poor widows deposited the money? Then we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, stealing from the poor to give to the poor. That doesn't work in the Robin Hood equation. So this might not work. You're like, oh well. It was a good effort. You know, we thought we could do this for so many people and help them out, right? And so you're about to put the money. You put the money back, you start to head out of the bank, and then as you're walking by the teller station, you suddenly see 4 letters. And then you notice they're at multiple places in the bank. What are those 4 letters?
FDIC.
FDIC. Oh yeah, FDIC. What does FDIC mean?
It's insured with $300,000.
Is it up to 300? I thought it was only 250.
I think it's higher now.
No, it's 250.
Well,
If you're a bank, you're insured for all of your deposits now, apparently. But before that, it was 250 to 300,000, right? So FDIC means if a poor widow puts $200,000 in the bank, we're not stealing the money from her after all. Ah, you're like, what if she has more than $250,000 in the bank? Well, then she isn't so poor, is she? Mm-hmm. So you're like, this works. I'm going back into that bank, I'm going to pick up a few Ben Franklins, right? You're sort of load them in, right? And then you're thinking Ben Franklin, and you're thinking back to the early American Constitution, and you're like, FDIC. That means the federal government is backing this. So I'm stealing from my own government, which doesn't seem very lawful or constitutional.
And the taxpayers. You steal it from yourself.
And it gets worse. And so you're like, uh-oh. So you start putting the money back. It's not great. I can't do this. And it's very sad. And you sit down on the floor and you think, man, I just wish I had some tea. I'd feel better about this. But then tea, and thinking about Ben Franklin, right? You're like, Boston Tea Party. There's something there. What was the tax rate that they rebelled over?
3%.
Yeah, 3.5% to 4%. And that was dropped. It had been 6%. But for the first time, the parliament sent collectors to actually collect it. You're like, what is my tax rate? Sales tax, registration for the car, property tax, marriage tax, newly married, weds, yep, you got to pay a little tax, right? You start adding it up. Yeah, there's taxes on gasoline. What are the estimates? About 50% of our income probably goes to taxes when you add it all up. They rebelled over 3.5%. You say, are you trying to mount an argument for a mass rebellion? No, what I'm suggesting is, whose money is this? Is it wrong for you to take some of your own money back out of a bank? Doesn't seem like it's a problem. So you're like, that's it. On the grounds of solid patriotism, I am taking back my own money for the good of the people. And so you load it up and out you go. Now, I know some of you wouldn't be able to do this, right? You go into the bank, you take the money, you start to walk out, and you'd break out into a sweat and a panic. You'd race back in the bank, you'd throw the money back, race out of the bank, I can't believe what I almost just did. You just don't have what it takes, right? You just don't have what it takes. Others of you, just, this is just not your aesthetic. You'd walk into the bank, oh, nice architecture, and you'd walk out. I'd have to do the whole argument again, at a Mercedes dealership. Then you'd be like, or a shoe store. You'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, now I feel the force of the argument. Shoes, yeah. Right? Exactly. See, you all know your vulnerability. So here's the question, right? Would you take the money? Would you take the money? And I know some of you are going to think, that's ridiculous, $100 million? I mean, if I only took, 25,000, okay. I can lower it to 25,000. If I can buy your soul for that cheap, let me tell you, I'll pay. And some of you are like, 100 million, come on, that's not enough. I'll raise it. 3.6 billion. Okay, you want bank level amounts? How about, what did they say Huntington was worth? About 275 billion. That's the question, right? What is the value of your soul worth? I'm going to write the question out precisely. And here's what I want you to do. If you think that you might take that money, I want you to get up and go to that side of the room. And if you think, I'm not going to take the money, then I want you to get up and go to this side of the room. Money takers, that side. Non-money takers, this side. I'll write the question, you move, everyone must choose.
I would put such value to this one.
Yeah, I was thinking the opposite.
All right. So, what? Why are you all seated? You're all you just happen to be all in the only two people were in the wrong place.
I actually moved further to the right.
All right. So over here are money takers. You're all money takers, and you're all no, we're not taking the money.
Right.
No way.
Interesting. All right. So, notice that we've isolated half the key question. What? You can grab a chair if you want. Okay. Pull one in. Grab a seat with the rest of these goody two-shoe types. You know, that's fine. Would you trade the value of your soul to acquire great reward? Okay. These people over here say, yeah, in a heartbeat. Absolutely. Right. And these people are dangerous. In fact, I want you to look at their faces and remember them. Because someday they're going to be on a billboard saying, vote for me. And you're going to be like, oh, I know that person. Yeah, right? But on the other hand, come on, right? They're not going to take the money? Really? I mean, do they really need the rings then? I don't see any reason for them to have a ring if they're not going to do anything with it. I say we take them back.
Let's sell the rings.
Too late, I grabbed it. Because here's the thing. Glaucon and Adeimantus are not done with you yet. Because they want to push the argument. So let's suppose we go back to our story. And let's suppose they don't just hit Huntington. Right? They hit Chase. Chase is doing very well now, right? So they hit Chase and they start hitting the other banks. Why stay with the United States? There's a whole world to explore. Right? They hit, the Louvre, start doing art, Crown Jewels, Tower of London. And they really do commit 90% to all of these causes and good things. And everyone in the world is amazed. They hired the best possible money launderers so they can't get found out. And these people are so famous, so amazing, right? They jointly become, Time Person of the Year. They're that awesome. Everybody wants to be around them. And they're very clever with the way they distribute the money. They cover all their bases.
We changed our last names to the Great.
Yeah.
Well, yes. That was one of the best moves. Best moves. And then, yes.
What if I just feel enough to say, let's say my father needs a life-saving operation, and I steal just enough to pay for that?
This is the gratitude you get from your children. Julia is my daughter, for those of you who do not know. We'll talk later, darling. Just enough, right? That's it. Yes. Well, of course, that's different. So they cover all their bases politically, right? You're going to be smart. You give money to all the different political parties, not just the Republicans and the Democrats, but the Socialists and the Green Party, right? All the different, the Libertarians, the whole 9 yards. Religion, same thing. Right? They're not just going to give to the Catholic Church. There are a lot of gods out there, right? So, you throw a few bucks to the Scientologists, just on it, Give some to the Protestants, the Buddhists, give some to the Hindus, right? The Muslims. You cover all your bases. You are making sure that you look very good in the eyes of both gods and men. Cover it all. And people really are impressed. Now, here's the thing. If you suddenly came into enormous wealth, right? You'd probably do what a lot of people do, which is go on a massive party, right? And initially, you might, buy 3 houses and 4 cars and 6 swimming pools and 10,000 shoes and all the rest. But what starts to happen?
The IRS.
Well, you got people to deal with that, and the whole world is full of money, and you can always get more. The IRS is not your problem. The problem is that you can only do so much, right? How many houses and cars can you use? So, and it takes more and more to manage it. There's always that problem. Here's the thing. What the wealthy realize is that wealth isn't about personal consumption, right? It's about social influence. What wealth enables you to do is move and influence things. And these people quickly figure that out. And so after doing all these charity works around the world, everyone loves them. They're so popular. The Democrats and the Republicans asked them jointly to be their nominee for President of the United States. First time in history. And they're like, well, we do want to serve. And there's one little catch. People ask you, there's this worldwide crime spree. Are you going to be able to do something about that? And they assure you, yeah, we will put a stop to that. It will end on our watch. Now, this is a bit of a problem, of course, you know. So they get elected, 98.6% of the vote. I think we know some of the non-voters. Goody two-shoes over here, right? And we took names, don't worry. And it's been very successful. But now you have a big problem. You're in office, and if you can divot who's the president, attorney general, whatever. But what are you going to do about the crime spree? How about confess it? Is this a good plan? No, not a good plan. What do you need?
A scapegoat.
A what now?
Scapegoat.
A scapegoat. A patsy. I like the way you think. Thomas? Can you turn on Thomas when you're both ring bearers? You guys got to stick together, right?
What about this? We take the Thrasymachus strategy and just openly declare that we're the thieves now that we have all the power.
Good luck with
I
that.
could steal all the nukes.
Here's a better idea. Pin it on somebody who doesn't have a nuclear weapon or a ring. I can think of some people. Right? I mean, they think they're so good. So one day while you're out there, you know, you're in the Louvre, that ridiculous picture, what's that crazy picture with a woman with that crooked smile? You never really liked that anyway, so you rip that down. A couple of the rubies from the Tower of London, right? Some of the gold bars from Fort Knox, you just hit that recently. And you go into their apartment, you put something in the mattress, hide something under a floorboard, and then an anonymous tip to the FBI, who catch you red-handed. So they bring you in for interrogation because they want to know where all the loot is. This is just a little bit. Where is it? And everyone is very anxious to find out. The whole world wants to know. And of course, you say, I'm innocent. They're innocent, yeah. So after a while, the police start using gentle persuasive techniques, right? They offer you a glass of water. Should you ever accept water from the police during interrogation? No. No, why? Because what will they not let you do after you drunk 6 glasses of water? Yeah, it's amazing how much you'll confess just to get to the toilet. But you somehow resist that. And, you know, so they do gentle techniques. They have you stand up a lot. They don't let you sleep. They offer to buy pizza, and then when they grab the phone book, they inadvertently, you know, hit the back of your head 6 to 8, 10 times a day. And yet these people are totally unmoved. You guys are shocked. What's driving them? It's remarkable. But the world is mad. They want to know what happened. I mean, even Amnesty International is not backing them. Why? They were cleaned out last week. They want their money back. So finally, the president gets up and makes a public declaration. He says, we tried everything. These people are a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States and, frankly, to the world. You know what that language means? Let's just say that the president has a friend in one of those old Spanish defunct cathedrals, and he gives him a call. Hey, you still got some of that old equipment from the good old days? It's like, as a matter of fact, we do. I'm going to send Air Force One to pick it up. Okay. And so soon, they're on the rack. You know. And the tortures continue in many horrifying ways. Remember Glaucon's list? Crucifixion, whipping, stretching, burning, the tongs. And then they come in, as you keep saying, but I'm innocent, I know nothing. They come in and they say, look, here's the thing. If you will pin the whole thing, confess your complicity, but pin the whole thing on Senator O'Reilly, their arch nemesis. He wants to launch investigations into the source of money. It's ridiculous, right? If you'll pin it all on him, we'll let you go, but we can't have you around unless you talk. So we'll banish you to an island in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and you'll have all the pina coladas you want for your life. It's that island on the show Lost. Remember that island? We won't tell them, though. How many of you will take the deal? If at this point you're like, you know, I've realized that the skin that I have left on my body is good, I'd like to keep it.
How much torture?
Well, let's see. We've had fire, pins, fire ants. We haven't yet got to dipping your feet into liquid nitrogen, and then hitting them with a sledgehammer. Because back in the day, they didn't have that option. But today, we have so much more advanced technology. It's a wonder. So how many of you at this point were like, I think I'm going to take that deal? Who is this Senator O'Reilly anyway, right? So if you say yes, at this point, I think we should throw justice to the wind, and we should pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of the pain avoidance. Then you can get up and join your friends over here. And I'll write the second question. This would be the time that you move. 2.
For the record, this is where I get off the bus. I just don't want to leave my brother.
See? Would you trade? So go ahead, you be moving now. This is where I should be hearing lots of motion.
If I were ever taken by the SS, you just know if you were in the resistance, you better be clearing out of town because I don't think that would last too long.
My own wife. Would you trade the value of your soul to avoid great harm? You see how we've now flipped the question. Did you want to go ahead and move down?
So that's the no's and
These are the people who are saying they want to, still they won't trade. They really, wow, they love pain.
See, it's already 1984.
It's a remarkable thing. Notice what Glaucon and Adeimantus have actually accomplished, right? They have flipped seeming and being, appearance and reality. Because in terms of what seems to be versus what is, right? Our crooks, this side of the room, seem to be just. Right? Everyone thinks they're the greatest ever. But what are they really? Unjust. And our goody two-shoe types, there's goody, seem to be unjust. But in fact, they are just. So what are Glaucon and Adeimantus doing? They are isolating the central question that we had. Avoided death. Is justice good in itself or not? They've isolated all the rewards typically associated with justice, right? And then they've heaped on the just man all the harms typically associated with injustice. So no longer are we making the argument on the basis of what justice brings you or what you avoid. Now it's straight up, is justice good in itself or not? And that was the central question. And all of you are saying, justice is still good in itself. We're sticking in our chairs. Go ahead, bring it on, baby. We're not moving. And there is something in our tradition, right, that we could argue backs this. What about Nathan Hale? Remember? Do we remember him? Do they teach him in the schools anymore? I regret that I have but one life to give for my country, right, when he was captured by the British during the Revolution for spying. And we're amazed at that. Socrates, too, did put his money where his mouth was, because in the end, democratic Athens killed him.
Patrick Henry.
He died?
Yeah, is that the guy? Yeah.
No, Patrick Henry.
Who am I thinking of?
You're thinking of Nathan Hale. Patrick Henry, is he the one that said, give me liberty or give me death?
Give me death.
He just happened to be on the winning side and avoided the death. But yes.
Was it hanged?
No, he wasn't hanged.
Okay.
No. So there's something admirable in that. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how do we get to the fact that the actual just people over there, is it just a perception that they're unjust at this point because we're the bad guys and we
Oh,
put
yeah.
it all on them?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And the jewels are found in their apartment. They don't have an explanation for that.
Oh, okay.
For multiple things.
So
I bet you found eyewitnesses to their activities too.
So really the injustice is just coming from the perception that they're unjust because we, the really unjust people, actually just pin it all on them.
That's right, exactly.
Okay.
It's better for everybody. This is in the Bible. Let one man die for the people. Right? Remember that? That was the argument to justify killing Jesus. Yeah. It worked then. Same thing. Same principle. You just got to go with what works, man. So, why are they here? Well, why don't we find out? What are you doing here? What's wrong with you people?
I think their lifestyle's too complicated because what you basically described was what Pablo Escobar did. It's like you have all these billions of dollars and you become a politician and you start paying people and when they're robbing stuff, then money dries up, then they lose their friends, then eventually something happens to them. Whereas,
Okay, but couldn't we argue that Pablo wasn't very good at what he was trying to do? He was no Alexander the Great. Pablar the not great.
yeah.
I mean, bombing the Supreme Court wasn't very smart, right? That turned the whole country against him. So yeah, if you're incompetent and you have a big drug lords don't tend to be particularly keen when it comes to thinking politically. They're great at drugs and moving drugs around and at slaughtering all their enemies. But they're not clever, right? If you're going to be clever, you have to have the kind of brilliance that Caesar, Napoleon, Alexander the Great did. Pablo Escobar, not so much. So we can't guarantee that every tyrant, right, is going to end up doing himself in by pissing off the wrong people. Historically, we just don't see that. Most of them, yes. But we have these glaring exceptions. So what other reasons? Why are you over here?
My moral compass would allow me to turn in somebody else.
Well, you can get a different compass. The compass store? What do you mean? Psychological? Because if you're in trouble with psychological, you know what you guys could do? Do you think you could get her some drugs? Heroin maybe? And then she wouldn't be so upset about this.
But then I wouldn't be making my own decisions. The drugs would be making the decisions for me.
Right, exactly. You're off top. And you're not being tortured and on the rack anymore.
But if
Win-win.
you'd be a drug
Yeah, well, yeah,
result of drug decisions.
that's true.
Kind of throws this logic out of.
Not going to go for the drugs, huh?
And then they become drug lords.
They're moving in that direction. They're moving that. Yeah.
Me?
Did you have a?
Well, I don't know if you're allowed to, at this point, bring religion into it.
Bring it in.
Okay.
How is this going to play into it?
Well, I'm not going to do anything that keeps me out of heaven.
Your soul lives a lot longer than your body, that's what I was thinking.
How many of you over here for reasons that would include religion? Ah.
Look at the markers.
The markers?
Martyrs.
The martyrs. Yes, the martyrs. All right, but here's my concern. Are you really disagreeing with Glaucon and Adeimantus? Or have you actually agreed with them more profoundly and you've disagreed with Socrates? In other words, what if you guys have actually done the math way better than these fools? You say, how so?
They just want a bigger treasure in heaven.
Yeah, golden streets, forever, right? These people get a few pleasures in this life. And then, oh boy, are you going to get yours? And you're like, oh boy, are they going to get theirs, right? So you just guys waited for the bigger pot of gold. So it's not that you love justice in itself. You love the bigger pot of goodies.
Maybe it's spending your life with God and the love and all that.
Yeah, there could be some love in there.
What about supposing we're atheists? So we don't have that moral code.
Yeah, but then why would an atheist be over here?
I mean, there's different reasons why people choose.
There could be.
Because you realize your actions, even though if you choose to go along with the injustice, you're spreading the cancer, and you care more about what your effects have on those around you than what it is for yourself.
I would say as an unjust man that I'll take care of the people that I care about. Let's say that I have all this wealth and power. So if anybody's dear to me, I'll just make sure they're okay. And if it's not dear to me, then I don't care.
Yeah.
Can an atheist have a moral code that's not religious bound?
Well, that's a really deep and good question. We'll have to answer that a different day. But let me push the religious question a little bit further. What happens if God comes down tomorrow and says, I've decided to change things up a little bit? So you remember how originally I gave you this thing, the 10 Commandments? Remember the last 5? Don't kill people, don't steal from people, all this? I've decided I'm going to reverse them. So now you have to kill people. You have to steal from them. You have to bear false witness against them. And anybody who disagrees, you're the ones going to hell. And all the people who go along with this, you're the ones going to heaven. Would you then switch sides and start committing all these violations?
Because God believes that. God is true.
Oh, God wouldn't do that?
Yeah, he put our conscience in us, and our conscience tells us.
Abraham, take your only son Isaac out to Mount Moriah, stick a knife in him, and then burn him to crispy waferness. You sure you know what God would ask?
He had faith that God would raise him back, even if he.
Maybe.
As a test.
You're a tough crowd.
Well, if morality is founded on God, then God could decide what morality is.
That's true.
So if he wanted to dictate that murder is good now, quote unquote, then he could. And then he could keep anybody who doesn't kill away from heaven if he wanted to. If he really was God.
If they're really separable.
But
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we do have to think about is, what is the nature of God? Can you have a bad God? Right? That's a big question. But what's really remarkable is how many people here are still on this side and saying we're holding our ground. And that's something. It's really something. The rest of you lot, suffering succotash. And they're the ones suffering. Right? So we've hit the question very hard. And I want you to think about it this way now. Whoops, I guess I need 3 or 4 whiteboards. That would be perfect. But let's summarize the argument with 2 new questions. Is justice necessary for happiness? Because what are they saying in answer to that question? No. Happiness can attach to any particular activity. Right? So if drugs get you happy, go for it. If stealing gets you happy, go for it. If going to church makes you happy, you go for it. Different strokes for different folks, right? But what if it is necessary?
It kind of reminds me of the saying, the longer the driveway, the more miserable the man.
Okay. You care to continue that analogy?
Well, with power, and especially if you have ungotten gains, you're having to isolate yourself more and more. The more you isolate yourself, the more empty you feel.
Yes, and this is the problem which we started with tyrants, right? They do seem to go into this isolation. And there is a question about whether they can stay true together, right? The old Highlander motto, there can be only one, right? That does seem to start to bite. And it seems like social connection starts to disintegrate. In other words, maybe you can't be happy without justice. Yeah.
But if justice is necessary for happiness, then I think doesn't that lead back to that earlier point in the sense of, are you actually pursuing justice for justice's sake, or is there a secondary good that is coming out of it?
Right, unless justice and happiness are intrinsically linked, in which case we're asking the same question. But think about how Americans think about this now, right? They think happiness is whatever you want it to be. In which case, justice has nothing to do with it. If you have a syringe full of H, right, is it heroin or happiness? And the answer is, if drugs make you happy, go for it. And if it doesn't, that's fine, whatever. But look, if happiness is whatever we wanted it to be, we'd all be happy. Right? You said, what's the path to happiness then? Set minimal goals. I mean, my goal for my happiness, and don't you dare judge me, is to cross this imaginary line right here. And when I cross it, I'm filled with happiness. Boy, look at all the haters in this room. So what do I have to put up with? Drum roll, please. I'll prove it to you. You got to try this. It's incredible, right? You're like, we don't believe you, right? Of course not. You say that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous if happiness is whatever I want it to be. It's precisely because you know happiness is not whatever I want it to be that happiness is the hardest thing ever, which is why we strive so hard to find it. Think about that. This is really a profound argument. Happiness is real and has genuine structure, and that's why so many people don't find it. And if it's really the greatest thing, it ought to take the greatest amount of investment of ourselves. So the American model of a total relative value of happiness makes no sense. None. So there may be real, serious conditions on happiness, and that's the direction Socrates is going to go in the Republic. Socrates is going to answer this question as absolutely yes. So if you commit injustices of this kind, you're never going to be happy. It's never going to work. Why? Money can only buy the things money can buy. And none of them have anything to do with what makes a man truly happy. Which is what you started to make the argument, the social argument at the end, which is curious why you're over here. If I were on the board again, maybe you'd be converted back. Now, question number 2 for this side. Is justice sufficient? In other words, is it enough for happiness? And this is the question of the torture in the rack and how you're happy on the rack. And yet, here's the irony. We do admire the martyrs. And even though you have these certain qualms, right? You're like, well, I hope I do the right thing if I got in that situation. You admire the martyrs, which means you would hope that that's what you would do. Because, why? Because justice is that valuable. Well, that must make it an extraordinary thing. And here again, Socrates is going to argue, yes, that justice is both necessary and sufficient, which then pushes the question that you asked, which is, it's identical to happiness. Now you say, how's he going to make that argument? That's the question of the Republic. The whole book is an attempt to answer this question. Why bother being good if you could get away with being bad? The whole book. Look how Socrates responds. Let's take a look. Let's actually get into the text here briefly, and then we'll break for tonight. My pages are really quite messed up. Ah, here we go. 367a, page 44. Maybe we're all on the same pages, but 367a. Here is Glaucon summarizing the whole argument. So let's read the summary, and then we'll see how Socrates reacts. Top of that page, this Socrates, and perhaps yet something more than this with Thrasymachus, and possibly someone else, say about justice and injustice, vulgarly turning their powers upside down, in my opinion at least. But I, for I need hide nothing from you, out of my desire to hear the opposite from you, speak as vehemently as I can. So Glaucon is saying, look, Socrates, I don't really trust this argument, but I'm pushing it with all the force that I can. He wants to be honest to it. You understand? Notice the value here for us. Push the tough arguments. Face them. Now, don't only show us by the argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but show what each in itself does to the man who has it that makes the one bad and the other good. And take away the reputations, the seeming, the appearances, right? The perceptions, as we were calling them here. As Glaucon told you to. I guess Adeimantus is actually talking. For if you don't take the true reputation from each and attach the false one to it, we'll say that you aren't praising the just, but the seeming just. Nor blaming being unjust, but the seeming unjust, and that you're exhorting one to be unjust and to get away with it. And that you then agree with Thrasymachus that justice is someone else's good, the advantage of the stronger, while injustice is one's own advantage and profitable, but disadvantageous to the weaker. Now, since you agreed that justice is among the greatest goods, those that are worth having for what comes from them, but much more for themselves, such as seeing, hearing, thinking, and of course being healthy, and all the other goods that are fruitful by their own nature, not by opinion, praise this aspect of justice. Of what profit is justice in itself to the man who possesses it? And what harm does injustice do? Leave wages and reputation to others to praise. I can endure other men's praising justice and blaming injustice in this way, extolling and abusing them in terms of reputations and wages. But from you I couldn't, unless you were to order me to, because you have spent your whole life considering nothing other than this, So don't only show us by the argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but show what each in itself does to the man who has it, whether it is noticed by gods and human beings or not. That makes the one good and the other bad. That's a wonderful summary of the argument. Don't you agree? The challenge to justice. And this is, by the way, the greatest challenge to justice that's ever been offered. I listened, Socrates, remember, narrator. I listened, and although I had always been full of wonder at the nature of Glaucon Adeimantus, at this time I was particularly delighted, and I said, that wasn't a bad beginning, you children of that man, that Glaucon's lover made to his poem about your distinguishing yourselves in the battle of Megara, sons of Ariston, divine offspring of a famous man. That, my friends, in my opinion, is good, for something quite divine must certainly have happened to you, if you are remaining unpersuaded that injustice is better than justice, when you are able to speak that way on its behalf. Now, you truly don't seem to me to be being persuaded. I infer it from the rest of your character. Interesting, right? Since on the basis of the arguments themselves, I would distrust you. If you really thought they believed what they said, would you go into business with them? No way. The more I trust you, the more I'm at a loss what I should do. On the one hand, I can't help out. For my opinion, I'm not capable of it. My proof is what I showed when I said to Thrasymachus that justice is better than injustice, back in Book 1. But you didn't accept that from me. On the other hand, I can't not help out, for I'm afraid it might be impious to be here when justice is being spoken badly of and give up, and not bring help while I'm still breathing and able to make a sound. So the best thing is to succor her as I'm able. Glaucon and the others begged me in every way to help out and not give up the argument, but rather to seek out what each is, and the truth about the benefit of both. So I spoke my opinion. It looks to me as though the investigation we are undertaking is no ordinary thing, but one for a man who sees sharply. Since we're not clever men, I said, in my opinion, we should make this kind of investigation of it. If someone had, for example, ordered men who don't see very sharply to read little letters from afar, and then someone had the thought that the same letters are somewhere else also, but bigger and in a bigger place, I suppose it would look like a godsend to be able to consider the littler ones after having read these first, if of course they do happen to be the same. So imagine someone asks you to read a billboard that's really far away, you can barely make it out, and then you realize the same billboard's right here, right? And you read that first, and then you look at the other one that's far away. It suddenly makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Most certainly, said Adeimantus. But Socrates, what do you notice in the investigation of the just that's like this? I'll tell you, I said. There is, we say, justice of one man, and there is surely justice of a whole city too. Certainly. Is a city bigger than one man? Yes, it is bigger. So then perhaps there would be more justice in the bigger, and it would be easier to observe closely. If you want, first we'll investigate what justice is like in the cities. Then we'll also go on to consider it in individuals, considering the likeness of the bigger in the idea of the littler. What you say seems fine to me. So, this is the point of the Republic, the city. This book is not a political book. This book is an ethical book. The question is individual justice worth it or not? But to answer it, Socrates is going to make an analogy between the individual soul and the city. That's where the political comes into the picture. But not because the goal here is to establish the political fully. And we'll see why that is in our next class. But the mission is individual. So keep track of the analogy and what this is all about. This argument that they start right now is going to take them up structurally all the way to the end of Book 4. And at the end of Book 4, it is going to be decisively and completed. So that will be our first couple of classes, will be to carve that argument out so we can get to the end of Book 4. And notice what he says. If we should watch a city coming into being in speech, we should also see justice coming into being and injustice. In other words, we'll find out where justice and injustice come from. Probably, when this is done, can we hope to see what we're looking for? Far more easily. Is it resolved that we must try to carry this out? I suppose it's no small job, so consider it. It's been considered. Don't do anything else. Well then, I said, a city, as I believe, comes into being because each of us isn't self-sufficient, but is in need of much. Do you believe there's another beginning to the founding of a city? None at all. And so we begin city building. Idea city building, that is. And the first principle is the principle that human beings lack self-sufficiency. So next week, this is where we'll pick up and we'll launch. Okay? Now, if you want to be ready to see the whole picture, but we're going to be doing this in chunks, okay? Essentially, read books 2 through 4. Okay? And I understand some of you are struggling a little bit with the reading. That's fine. See how we just went through this and it made sense? Okay, the pieces of the puzzle will make sense as we go through them, talk them out in class, get into the text, get into the argument, and then keep going. Okay, so don't give up if you struggle with the reading. That's perfectly normal. Everybody struggles with the reading. Okay, the point is, in the class, we'll open this stuff up. Okay, any questions?
How far are we supposed to read the next?
Ideally to the end of book 4, but because we're right now in the middle of book 2, so let's see, where does book 4 end? We're not going to, let's see, actually, I can tell you how far we're not going to, let's see, there we are. Where we'll go, read up to 427D. It's on page 105. When we get to 427D, we're then going to look for something crucial, having built our city. But first, we got to build it. So next week, it's city building. Yeah?
You don't touch on book 1 at all?
No.
Oh,
I said at the beginning, we're only going to do about half the book.
okay.
Everyone reads book 1 and then reads books 5 and 7. We're not reading book 1 and we're not reading any of books 5 through 7. You say, why? Aren't they good? They're good, but they're not the main thrust of the Republic. And I'll explain why we're going to skip 5 through 7 when we get to the end of book 4 and then jump to book 8.
Read to page 104.
105.
105, yep, middle of 105 at 427D. So read from here, where do we leave off? 369B to 427D. Okay, and that's all going to be about the building of the city and the different classes that are going to be within the city. That's the key concept, the structure of the city. All right? And then we'll see where this all goes. And be prepared. It's going to be the ride of your life. All right, everyone good? Tough question to ask. Are you really good? Good question. All right, see you all next week.